Sup, you beautiful bastards? It's me, Aaron, from the show Re-Education, and today I'm going to do something probably a little bit different. I'm going to do several different stories, Philip DeFranco style. Not really, I'm not that good. And we're going to talk about a couple of things that happened within the last week. I'm going to talk about my opinions about those things, and without any further ado, let's jump into it. Okay, so the very first thing that I want to talk about is basically the top story of the night, the Hakim Vaush debate. And I just gotta say, it was great. The best part about it was that it was boring. And I think whenever two leftists get together in the same room, ready to throw down Bloodsport style in a debate, it shouldn't be those things. It should be boring, and it should, at the end of the day, promote leftist unity. Because I think really that's what we need right now. We don't need a whole bunch of people at each other's throats and fighting and going completely mad. But for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, I'll give you a little bit of backstory. So over the last couple of weeks, a streamer named Vaush got into a little bit of a heated argument, I guess, with another YouTuber named Hakim. Hakim is a Marxist-Leninist. They do strictly anti-capitalist, very pro-communist work, and Vaush does, sort of a similar thing, but he mainly focuses on debates. Now, Hakim and Vaush come from two very different strategies of thought. On Hakim's side, he looks at things in a very analytical, very specific way, and basically breaks down arguments into its smallest forms and talks about how things are right or wrong or whatever, usually giving a lot of different recommendations for books and other work that you can look at further so you can learn more things, whereas Vaush is more like a hammer or like a some sort of bludgeoning tool. He does things more or less debate style and usually is able to use rhetoric and discourse to mainly make people that he's arguing with dig themselves into their own grave. It's fun to watch. A lot of people enjoy it. A lot of people don't enjoy it. I'm not here to talk about whether or not you like or dislike Vaush or Hakim. As far as I'm concerned, I don't really care about that in this situation. What I do care about is a lot of the arguments that they made, and they made a lot of great ones. So let's talk about that. So like I was saying, Vaush and Hakim had a bunch of back and forths over the last week and a half or so, and they made video after video responding to each other, basically telling each other how they're wrong in different ways. I believe all of this started because Vaush made a comment saying that Marx and Lenin would have voted for Joe Biden, which probably isn't true, but it was a fun, controversial video that got a lot of people to pay attention, if anything else. So Hakim made a video about that, and since Hakim is more or less, maybe not an expert, but very well read when it comes to a lot of Marxist-Leninist and communist literature, they came in to explain to Vaush why they were wrong. So Vaush looked at Hakim's video, and he maybe wasn't as nice as he should have been in regards to his response when it came to that. So he attacked Hakim, basically saying that he was disgustingly ignorant of American politics, something like that. And it ended up blowing up online. A lot of people, their hair set on fire, and they wanted to know how Hakim was going to handle this and how Vaush was going to handle this. And here I am turning into basically a drama channel. I'm so sorry for this. I'm just trying to give you backstory so I can get to the actual arguments. God damn, I hate everything I've become. Anyway, let's skip ahead. They talk back and forth, blah, blah, blah. Who gives a shit? So when they actually got into the debate, something really remarkable happened. Hakim basically did the same thing to Vaush as Slavoj Zizek did to Jordan Peterson. Now, that isn't to say that I think that either one of them are very much the same. Obviously, Jordan Peterson and Vaush are not the same, and Zizek and Hakim are completely different. But he used a similar tactic. And I think that it was a really, really smart, clever idea. Now, it may not have given the audience the blood that it wanted, but it was able to give the audience something to actually bite into and learn about and discuss, and it furthered some political discourse as far as I'm concerned. And I think at the end of the day, it was actually a very good thing. So what was it exactly that Hakim did? Well, he went into the debate not actually wanting to debate, but to just have a discussion. a friendly chat between peers about socialist policies and ideas. The debate itself, I believe, was on the topic of reform and revolution, not versus revolution. So immediately off the bat, we're not coming at it from a combative place. We're coming at it from a, yes, I understand this position. Yes, I understand this position. How can we work together kind of place? And I think that was really smart. Now, I didn't agree with all of the arguments that both of the two of them were making throughout the video. I'll touch on that a little bit and give my perspective on it, but, it's not like I'm trying to call anybody out here. I'll just give my perspective on the topic at hand. But a couple of things that I did really agree with was I really appreciate how different people are able to come to different ideas through completely different means. For example, Vaush has been able to come to a lot of very similar socialist perspectives, as Hakim and myself and many others, more or less through an organic method. He hasn't really read a whole lot of theory, and he says that, all the time. He's probably read the basic stuff, probably a little bit of Capital, the Communist Manifesto, stuff like that, but to his own admission, he hasn't read a whole lot of theory, but he still has a lot of class consciousness and maybe sometimes stumbles the wrong way into some things that aren't really socialist. A lot of the time he stumbles the right way into a lot of things that really are. And considering that he came to a lot of this stuff completely organically, I think that's admirable. I think that's really interesting. And it's not the same sort of method that some of the other people that are in the leftist community have come to those sorts of ideas. Hakim, for example, probably didn't come to his socialism through organic means, maybe a little bit at first, but that was immediately bolstered by his love for reading and wanting to find out more and dig deeper and find all of these different sources so they could back up what they believe. And I think that that's a really admirable thing to do as well. That's something that I like to do. I think that I actually fall somewhere in the middle. I like to read, but I'm not a great reader, so I get through books pretty slowly. And I do think that a lot of socialist ideas and policies and sort of things like that are organic, and they kind of flow once you understand a certain amount of the basics. So you can kind of figure out how socialism works once you understand the fundamentals of it. And the extra reading just adds to that. It adds to the flavor. It adds to the magic of the whole thing, the tapestry, if you will. I also agree with them on a couple of other things, but I probably imagine that you don't really care, and you just want to hear about the things that I disagree with them on, so we'll talk about that. Okay, the first thing that I kind of disagree on, or at least I agree to the premise, but I disagree on parts of it, is this whole idea that revolutions will only ever come from the global south. Now, obviously, revolutions are more likely to always come from places where they don't have all of the great amenities and shit that places like the United States or Canada has. That's obvious. That's inevitable. It's always been that way. But I don't think that we should be putting a narrative across that we should be relying on the global south to save us. Now, that isn't exactly what they were saying. I know that both the two of them were talking about how, yes, you need to try for a revolution here and blah, blah, blah. But I want to just reiterate here that even though a revolution might not happen here first, maybe it is more likely to happen in the global south, we should always be pushing for a revolution here. We need to be making sure that we're spreading class consciousness. That's the first step, because that's the thing that's going to allow us to put ourselves into a position where a real revolution is possible. We don't have the groundworks yet for a revolution, but we need to be building those now, and we need to be actively doing that every single day. It's very important. If you're not out there spreading class consciousness to all of the people that you know, then there are going to be fewer people that understand what's going on, and I hate to break it to you folks, but the capitalist system as it is does not It is not long for this world, so to speak. Every single system throughout history has been born, it evolved, it grew, and then it died. And right now, capitalism is basically in end-stage capitalism. It's basically on the verge of fully collapsing. And if we aren't ready and willing and able and have worked very hard on building those dual power structures and a new system for this whole old system to collapse into, then we're going to wind up with fascism. That's how this works. If you don't actively work towards a revolution or revolutionary goals within your community right now, then it doesn't matter how many votes you fucking cast. It doesn't matter how many politicians you try to convince. You're going to wind up with dudes marching in the streets, probably wearing brown shirts, and they really won't like black and brown people. You end up with fascism every single time, so we cannot and should not ever rely on the global south to save us. Yes, they are going to have revolutions first, but that absolutely does not negate the fact that we need to be working towards a revolution here, today, right now. It reminds me of this part of the book in 1984 where the main character kept saying to themselves, I really, really hope that the proles will rise up and eventually overthrow the system. We're relying on the proles. We're relying on the proles. And the proletariat never actually rises up, and it never actually saves them. It's the same sort of thing here. Yes, the global south might rise up, but unfortunately they're not going to be able to save anybody in America or in Canada or in the global north, and they're especially going to have an even harder time rising up if the United States continues to exist in the capacity that it does, where it constantly crushes and squashes and destroys every single socialist experiment that comes up. So as long as the American empire exists without any real left-wing influence within it, they're going to continue to destroy every leftist revolution that pops up all across the third world, or at least they're going to try to. So yes, support every single revolution and every sort of activity that's happening in the global south. Do whatever you can to support those people and learn from them, because that's where we're going to get most of our information from. Learn from the minority groups and such that are in our own countries and are in our own geographic location, because they're also going to know probably the best ways to go against the system. But at the same time, always work towards revolutionary goals right now. It doesn't mean that a revolution is going to happen tomorrow. It doesn't mean it's going to happen in 15 years from now, but it does mean that you're building it right now. And that's what's important. Now, another thing that I had a very strong disagreement with was this whole idea that direct action is not as important as electoralism, and that somehow voting for people or casting your vote is going to be more beneficial in some way than doing direct action. And I just want to say that's absolutely ridiculous, and it doesn't follow history at all. In fact, every single serious person that talks about economics tells you straight up that electoralism and voting for people to do things for you will not change anything at all. Here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen. The vast majority of all policy that's passed in the United States has absolutely nothing to do with what the voters want. It only and solely has to do with what the donors want. That's how this has always worked. And to assume that somehow voting for a couple of Justice Democrats or like 5 or 6 socialist people to be in office, like that's going to make a big difference, it's not. The idea of taking over the Democratic Party from within has been proven to not work. It's a failed strategy. It does not get you anywhere. And in fact, within the 2 years or more that all of these socialist candidates have been in office, they haven't done anything substantial at all. And that goes directly against what a lot of them were saying. Even AOC herself was saying that she could do more as a one-term congressperson if she actually had the courage to fight than she could in her entire career in the Congress if she was unwilling to fight. In fact, I'll show this clip right now.
If you're a one-term Congress member, so what? You can make 10 years worth of change in one term if you're not afraid.
The idea that electoralism saves lives is ludicrous. It actually works actively against everything that you've ever wanted. It's not electoralism that changed anything. It's always been direct action. It's always been people in the streets pushing for things that need to change. Do you think slavery was abolished by electoralism? No, it was abolished through direct action. The same thing goes when it comes to black power or civil rights or women's liberation or trans rights or even fighting for gay marriage. That wasn't changed by a bunch of policymakers making policy. It changed because a mass movement of people actively marched in the streets and did everything they could to fight for those things. To say that direct action is somehow less than electoralism is just to not understand how history or how anything has actually changed in the United States. Yes, a politician sometimes signs their little name on a piece of paper that passes the legislation, but it never gets to that point without direct action. Direct action is the only way to get the goods. You might get itty-bitty, minuscule concessions from some politicians sometimes, but almost never will they actually do anything that substantially changes anything at all. And I can tell you right now that if you get into the street and you start handing out grocery bags full of food to people that are hungry, you're going to do a hell of a lot more for people that are in your town than voting for a politician ever would. And the thing is that every single serious economist across the board agrees with me on this. There isn't one single leftist-leaning economist or person that even studies the economy that would tell you anything different. Howard Zinn, Noam Chomsky, Slavoj Zizek, Richard Wolff, every single one of them are going to tell you that direct action is the way to make things different. It's the way to make change. Some people will also say getting in a third party, a people's party, will probably help, and maybe that will. I'm an anarchist, I'm not really a party person, but a lot of people think that that's somehow going to help things, so maybe we'll talk about that on a future video. Even communist revolutionaries throughout history knew that direct action was the thing that made things different. Ho Chi Minh didn't wait around for the capitalists to give them grain by voting. He went in and stole the grain and gave it to the people because they were starving. Mao didn't just wait around for the nationalists and the capitalists to come in and give them health care when they were fighting them in a war. He actively worked towards building dual power structures so people would be able to have those things. It was through direct action. It was never through voting for a politician that changed those things. So if you don't think that the amount of direct action that's going on right now is enough to change anything at all, then that isn't a fault of direct action. That is a fault of people not getting out in the streets and doing direct action. So if you really want to change something, then go out there and change it. You have the power. You have the ability. Nobody else is going to do it. No politician is going to save you. Now, the final thing that I am going to talk about, and the final thing that I have a little bit of a problem with, is this idea that one of them brought up, I believe it was Vaush, that the BLM protests haven't really achieved anything. I don't know if he really meant that, but I have seen other people make that argument since then, and I want to just slap that argument down immediately. The BLM protests are some of the largest sustained protests in modern American history. They rival that of anything that was done in civil rights or women's liberation or anything like that. It is some of the most important direct action and activism that has actually been seen in American history in decades. We've seen situations where socialists and anarchists took over large portions of city blocks. They've been able to set up direct action and mutual aid facilities that have helped people be able to actually afford their rent, buy food, get clothing, pay bills, every sort of thing that people need. Socialists and anarchists and communists have been working their asses off to get those things. And I don't think that we should be belittling any of the work that any of the protesters have done thus far. It's all been incredibly big, incredibly important work. The fact that we haven't seen thousands of immediate results from these protests doesn't mean that the protests aren't extremely important or unbelievably powerful when it comes to motivating people to do things. And you have to remember as well that a lot of the concessions that are being made from those protests aren't being broadcast by a whole lot of people. Now, like I said, I don't think that either one of them were actually saying that the protests weren't useful or weren't good or were producing nothing. I'm sure that they would both agree that they are producing a lot. I just wanted to make that argument a little bit stronger because there are a lot of people that I've seen jumping into my mentions that brought this point up and was saying that none of the protests and none of the direct action and none of the literally just feeding people is helpful because we could just vote for someone in 4 years. And that's That's ludicrous. Now, that's all of the things that I disagree with. Just to cap this little story off, one of the things that I thought was really quite funny was that some of the people in Vaush's audience were really upset that he was promoting State and Revolution, a book that was written by Vladimir Lenin. I assume, this is just me assuming, I assume that the people that were upset about him promoting that are probably people that jumped on the bandwagon when he was promoting anarcho-Bidenism, which was a joke. And I assume that a lot of them actually came from Pim Tool's audience when Vaush went on to his podcast a couple of months ago. So I assume that's where a lot of those people were coming from, and I assume that's why they were freaking out and saying, oh my goodness, why could you be promoting State and Revolution? Why would you be promoting theory? It's because it's good. State and Revolution has a lot of really bad ideas. It paints anarchists in a horrible light, but it is actually a good book, and I do suggest every single person go out there and read it, because damn, shorty, if you're not at least reading the classics when it comes to communist theory, then what are you doing? Get out there and read those books. It's important stuff. And then read some Bookchin and some Kropotkin right afterwards, because you need a chaser from the authoritarianism. Now, jumping to the second story that we have today, I'm going to talk about hashtag force the vote. So without any further ado, let's jump into that. Okay, so a little bit of a recap for all of you that haven't seen my video previously on hashtag force the vote. Basically, there was an idea that was pushed by an online comedian named Jimmy Dore, where the Justice Democrats and a lot of the socialist progressives in Congress would withhold their vote for Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, to continue to be Speaker of the House unless she decided to put a floor vote, a vote on the floor of the House for Medicare for all. So essentially, they would hold Nancy Pelosi's speakership seat hostage unless she gave people health care in a pandemic. And a lot of people had a problem with this idea, and I covered all of the reasons why people had problems with this idea in a previous video. I'll link to that right now or in the description box below. Needless to say, 99% of the arguments that were being pushed as to why people shouldn't do this were BS. They were all fallacious arguments that didn't really have anything to do with reality. One of the main arguments that I seen was that people didn't want to do this because they thought Jimmy Dore was being too rude. Now, I will admit Jimmy Dore was being rude. He was being extremely rude. He was being overwhelmingly angry and combative, and I think it was justified because you have to realize that he's talking to a politician here. He's talking to one of the most powerful people on the face of the earth. And if you're going to be mean or rude to anybody, I would say that elected officials in government that have power over what happens in your life, those are the people that you should be mean and rude to. They shouldn't even have that position in the first place as far as I'm concerned, but that's another story. So a lot of people were upset that Jimmy Dore was being mean and rude to all of these politicians. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't care about their feelings. I don't care whether or not they felt like they were being attacked. They are elected representatives that have the power to change things. They have the power to actually give people health care in a pandemic, and they chose not to do that. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself. I'll talk about that right now. So it turns out that instead of withholding their vote, like a lot of people wanted them to do, they expressed to everyone online that they felt as though all of the people that were picking on them and saying, fuck you, force the vote, they said specifically that was akin to violence. Now, I'm not entirely sure if any of these people, specifically AOC who released that tweet, understand what real violence is, but I would have to say that the real violence is happening in the street right now with people not actually getting health care in a pandemic, which is something that needs to be addressed. Because of this, because she felt as though she was being attacked, she decided to side with the corporate interests and the billionaires and the millionaires and Nancy Pelosi by voting for her to be Speaker of the House all over again. And following tightly in tow every single one of the Justice Democrat socialists that are in Congress did exactly the same thing. Not one of them leveraged their power. Not one of them used their ability to change something in the midst of a very important time in history to actually help the people. And that's indicative of every single politician that's out there. That's exactly what every politician will do or would do. The unfortunate thing is that you, the American public that voted these people in, hoped and prayed that they would be different, that they would bring change, that they would actually fulfill the promises that Obama set out. But it turns out that they did exactly what Obama did. Now, did they start out in Congress as people that were fighting for you and all of the other people that are in your country? Probably. But unfortunately, there's no way for you to be in public office. There's no way for you to get inside of that state structure without becoming corrupt yourself. And that's exactly what happened here. AOC and the squad believed that it was smarter strategy for them to get along with Nancy Pelosi so they could actually push some sort of legislation in the future. Unfortunately, that future is something that will never come. We've seen that throughout history. We've seen that with Ralph Nader. We've seen that with Bernie Sanders. We've seen that with every left-wing or even left-of-center politician that tried to push any sort of ideas in that establishment, in that structure. They were always fought tooth and nail. They were never given any real power. And that's exactly what's going to happen here. If you do not use your power properly, if you do not leverage power when you have the opportunity to do so, then you lose that power. And unfortunately, in this case, they lost that power. They no longer have any leverage over Nancy Pelosi, or anybody at all for that matter. And they're just going to have to continue to go along, to get along, forever. It's an old saying, but a very, very true one, is that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And absolutely, every one of these people have been given power, and it has worked to corrupt them. They no longer fight, at least not 100%, for the people. They don't even listen to a lot of the organizers on the ground. They don't even actually listen to a lot of the policies and positions that they themselves held just a year and a half to 2 years ago. It's depressing, it's saddening, but I don't want that to discourage any of you out there. If you are a social democrat or a democratic socialist or a progressive in any way, I don't want that to discourage you. I want it to radicalize you. I want this moment to allow you to realize that there are no politicians out there that are actually fighting for your best interest. They are always going to fight to make sure that they stay in power as long as possible. And if it means giving you some things sometimes, then great, but usually it doesn't. No politician is going to save you. No elected representative is going to be a superhero and make things better. That, like I said at the beginning of this video, is entirely up to you. That's something that only you can achieve, and you can achieve it through direct action. You have to get out there, you have to do it, you have to get involved and invested, because politics is not a spectator sport. You have to actually be willing to get on the field and play to win. And if you don't, then you lose every single time. So if you are a disaffected socialist, progressive, social democrat, or whatever it is, and you're really upset with the decisions that AOC and the squad made, then I would strongly suggest that you join a leftist organization. Join up with Food Not Bombs, Socialist Rifle Association, any sort of leftist, socialist, communist, or red-leaning group. You gotta join up with them, because that's where the real change happens. It happens in the street, it happens because of you, and you can actually make that change. You can actually make that difference. And even people like AOC showed you the way. They showed you that if you get out in the street and you talk to people and you actually make yourself known, then you can get to the highest reaches of the government, or even actually get to the highest point of being able to help people, just because you actively went out there and tried. At least, that's the way I look at it. If you do get a chance, please check out all the links in the description box below. Hit that little bell button, because you know that they're not going to let you know when I release a new video. And make sure you're subscribed, because they're unsubscribing people every single day. And please donate to my direct action fund and buy yourselves a t-shirt, because those are how I help other people and how I help myself. So thank you very much for watching. Have a nice day.